They told me that silence was the price of survival, that the words I have, the memories that are burned into the back of my skull like a brand, were a danger not just to me, but to the very concept of national security. They gave me a new name, a new life, a pension that arrives like clockwork, and a list of things I'm never, ever to think about again. At the top of that list is a name, Corporal David Evans. At the top of that list is a project, Protocol Nomad. They don't know I'm making this tape. If they did, I'd already be gone. Not dead, not in the conventional sense. They are far more creative than that. I'd just be erased. A clerical error in the grand humming machinery of the state. I'm sitting in my study. It's late, sometime after 2 in the morning. The only light comes from the small red record indicator on this old cassette deck I bought from a pawn shop 2 towns over. It feels appropriate somehow. Analog. Something they can't wipe from a server. Something that has a physical weight, a presence in the room, just like the memories do. The silence in this house is a living thing. It has weight and texture. But tonight, the whispers are starting again. Not real whispers, not in my ears. They are fainter than that. They are the whispers of a pattern, a tremor in the fabric of things that I recognize, that I feel in my bones. I saw a report on an obscure news aggregator last week. A geological survey team in the South Pacific reporting anomalous energy readings from the deep ocean. The report was scrubbed from the internet within an hour, but I saw it, and I knew. He's still moving. After all these years, so the silence has lasted long enough. Someone else needs to know the truth before it's buried for good. Before they try it again. You have to understand. We thought we were patriots. We thought we were building the future. We were arrogant, brilliant, and blind. Let me take you back to where it all began. The year is 2007. The place is a patch of hellfire and alkali dust in the Nevada desert that the maps call a restricted zone, but that we called Site Chimera. We were there to break one of God's oldest laws, the law that says you can only be in one place at one time. We were about to give a man the power to teleport. What we did instead, what we unleashed. God help me, what we did to that poor boy. Let me tell you about Corporal David Evans. The day I met him, the sun was a hammer blow over the Nevada desert, and he had the clearest eyes I had ever seen. The journey to Site Chimera was always a masterclass in psychological disorientation. You didn't just drive there, you were delivered piece by piece, shedding your identity with every mile marker. It started with a commercial flight to Las Vegas, a city of dazzling, meaningless noise. I remember walking through the casino at McCarran Airport, the cacophony of slot machines and desperate laughter feeling like a different planet. It was a perfect contrast, a deliberate one, I always thought. A final dose of chaotic, pointless humanity before you descended into the sterile, purposeful silence of the project. From Vegas, a nondescript sedan, the kind that blends into any government motor pool, would take you to a small, private airfield on the edge of the desert. The driver never spoke. His name was probably something like Agent Miller or Agent Smith. A human placeholder whose only job was to ensure you made the transition. The air began to change out there. The humidity vanished, replaced by a dry, ancient heat that felt like it was radiating from the core of the planet. The sky opened up, becoming a vast, merciless blue canvas. You felt smaller, insignificant. That was the point. The final leg of the journey was a 40-minute flight in an unmarked twin-prop plane, a durable, unglamorous workhorse. The windows were small, and the drone of the engines was a constant, monotonous hum that vibrated through your seat, through your bones, lulling you into a state of detached contemplation. I remember looking down at the landscape. It wasn't just empty, it was violently empty. A crumpled brown and ochre map of stark mountain ranges, dry lake beds that shone like bone, and endless, shimmering plains of rock and sand. It was a place where secrets could be kept forever. We were not the first. You could see the scars of the past from the air, faint, circular patterns in the earth, the ghostly outlines of old test sites from the atomic age, places where we had torn a hole in the sky decades ago. We were just the next chapter in a long, ugly book. Colonel Eva Rostova, our military liaison, was on that flight with me. She was a woman carved from granite, with a gaze that could measure your worth, find it wanting, and dismiss you in the span of a single heartbeat. She wasn't a scientist. She was a manager of assets, and we, the physicists, were just another asset. She sat across from me, not reading, not sleeping, just staring out the window, her reflection a stern mask superimposed over the desolate earth. "He's here," she said, her voice cutting through the engine drone without effort. It took me a moment to understand. "The candidate? They've selected him?" She nodded, a short, sharp movement. "Corporal David Evans, 24 years old. Exemplary service record. Psychological profile is off the charts. Stable, brave, patriotic. He thinks he's testing a new generation of personal armor." The lie was so simple, so clean. It was always a lie. You can't get a man to volunteer to have his constituent atoms disassembled and beamed across a room if you tell him the truth. You tell him he's a hero testing a new shield. Rostova turned from the window, and her eyes locked onto mine. "Your machine is ready, Dr. Thorne. The Pentagon is not known for its patience. The Nomad unit is calibrated and stable, Colonel," I replied, my voice sounding defensive even to my own ears. "Dr. Finch has run the simulations 10,000 times. It's as ready as it will ever be." "Simulations are not reality," she stated flatly. "Alistair Finch is a brilliant man, but his ambition sometimes outpaces his caution. That is why you are here, Aris. You are his caution. You are the brake. Do not forget that." I just nodded. She was right. Alistair Finch was the lead physicist, the visionary. He was a man who saw the universe as a set of beautiful, elegant equations, and he believed, with an almost religious fervor, that if the math said it was possible, it was possible. I was the pragmatist, the engineer, the one who saw the 1,000 ways Nash elegant theory could collapse into catastrophic, messy reality. We were a team, a perfect balance of ambition and restraint. Or so we thought. The airfield at Site Chimera was just a strip of hardened asphalt that appeared suddenly in the middle of nowhere. The moment the plane's wheels touched down, the heat hit you. It was a physical presence. The air was thin and smelled of dust and hot metal. The facility itself was a low, windowless concrete bunker, a brutalist scar on the landscape, designed to be functional, survivable, and utterly devoid of soul. It was surrounded by a triple layer of chain link and barbed wire with camera posts that watched you with cyclopean indifference. This was our home, our cathedral of science, our tomb. We were met on the tarmac by Alistair himself. He was vibrating with an energy that was almost manic, his eyes wide, his thin frame practically thrumming. "Aris, Eva, you're here. We're on the precipice. Everything is green. All systems are nominal. We're ready to make history." He was already walking towards the main entrance, expecting us to follow. Rostova fell into step beside him. "Dr. Finch, introduce me to the candidate." We entered the bunker, and the world changed. The oppressive heat was instantly replaced by the chill of industrial air conditioning. The silence of the desert was replaced by the low, omnipresent hum of the facility's life support and the massive generators that powered our work. The corridors were long, white, and sterile, lit by humming fluorescent tubes. Every few yards, a green light above a security camera would watch you pass. It was a place designed to strip you of your humanity, to turn you into a cog in a machine. They brought him to the main briefing room, Corporal David Evans. He was younger than I expected. He stood at a perfect parade rest, his jaw set, but his eyes were alive with a clear, honest curiosity. He wasn't intimidated by Rostova's uniform or by the stark, sterile environment. He was a soldier, and this was just another duty. Corporal Evans, Rostova began, her voice formal. I am Colonel Rostova. These are Doctors Thorne and Finch. You understand the nature of your assignment? Yes, Colonel, he said, his voice steady and clear. I'm here to field test the Aegis Mark IV personal defense system. I'm to report on its mobility, its effect on my combat readiness, and its resilience. That's correct, Rostova said, not missing a beat. The system generates a localized quantum field. For the purpose of this test, we need to measure its ability to withstand certain energetic transmissions. Your job is simply to stand there, and then report how you feel. Understood, Colonel, he said. He looked at me and Alistair. Doctors, it's an honor. Alistair beamed, shaking his hand with too much enthusiasm. The honor is all ours, Corporal. You are the tip of the spear, the man who will walk into the future. I just shook his hand. It was firm, dry, and strong. I looked into his eyes, and all I could see was trust. A clear, unwavering, absolute trust in us, in his country, in the mission. And I felt a sudden, cold knot of guilt in my stomach. He was a good kid, a patriot volunteering for what he thought was a noble cause. We were about to use that patriotism, that trust, as fuel for a fire we barely understood. The lie felt heavier than ever. Rostova dismissed him, and he was led away by a guard to be prepped. When he was gone, she turned to Alistair. He's perfect. Don't break him, Alistair. Alistair just laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound. Break him? Eva, my dear. We're going to make him immortal. The walk to the test chamber felt like a final procession. It was at the very heart of the facility, 100 feet below the desert floor, shielded by layers of concrete and lead. The hum of the machinery grew louder as we descended, becoming a deep, resonant thrum that you could feel in your teeth. We were approaching the altar. We were ready to make our sacrifice. The last thing I remember before we entered the control room was seeing Mr. Sterling standing by the final blast door. He was the Darpa liaison, a man who existed in shades of gray. He never raised his voice, never showed emotion, but he was always there, watching, observing. He was the true power in this room, the quiet embodiment of the people who were paying for all this. He just nodded at us as we passed, his face a blank mask. His presence was a stark reminder. Success would be celebrated in secret. Failure would be buried, and everyone involved would be buried with it. We were on the precipice, as Alistair had said, but I had the sudden, terrifying feeling that we were about to fall. The control room for the Nomad chamber was a hermetically sealed bubble of technology and tension. It was separated from the chamber itself by a 4-foot-thick wall of reinforced concrete and a triple-pane sheet of ballistic, lead-lined glass that was so dense it made the world on the other side look slightly warped, slightly distant. The air inside was cold and smelled of ozone and hot electronics, the clean, sterile scent of immense power being held in check. Banks of monitors lined the walls, displaying endless columns of data, schematics of the Nomad array, and biometric readouts from the subject. The only sound, besides our own breathing, was the soft clicking of keyboards and the deep, pervasive hum of the capacitors charging deep below the floor. It was a sound that felt like a held breath, a promise of imminent, violent release. Alistair Finch was in his element. He moved between the stations with a frantic, bird-like grace, his fingers dancing over keyboards, his eyes darting between a dozen different screens. He was a conductor tuning his orchestra for the performance of a lifetime. Main power core at 100%, he chirped, not to anyone in particular, but to the room itself. Magnetic containment field is stable. Resonant frequency locked. We are beautiful, Aris. Just look at this. The math it's poetry. I stood by the main observation window, my hands clasped behind my back, trying to project a calm I did not feel. My job, as Rostova had reminded me, was to be the brake, to watch for the one data point in a million that was out of place, the tiny flaw in the poetry of Alistair's equations. On the other side of the glass, the test chamber was a stark white sphere, about 50 feet in diameter. It was featureless, seamless, and eerily quiet. In the exact center of the sphere stood two circular platforms, about 10 feet apart. One was designated the origin platform, the other, the destination. They were made of a strange, matte black composite material that seemed to drink the light. The walls of the sphere were studded with a complex array of emitters and sensors, the hardware of the Nomad device. It didn't look like a teleporter from a science fiction movie. There were no flashing lights or spinning rings. It looked more like a surgical theater or a torture chamber. It was brutally functional. Corporal Evans was led into the chamber by two technicians. He was wearing simple gray fatigues with a series of small, silver dollar-sized biometric sensors attached to his temples, chest, and wrists. He walked with a confident stride, looking around the sphere with a professional curiosity. He caught my eye through the thick glass and gave me a slight, reassuring nod, a silent, "I'm ready," that sent another pang of guilt through me. He stepped onto the origin platform and stood at ease, his eyes forward. The technicians gave a thumbs up to the control room, then exited, the heavy, vault-like door hissing shut behind them with a deafening thud and a series of heavy locking clicks. He was alone now. A single human figure in a vast, sterile white void. "Subject is in position," one of my technicians, a young, sharp kid named Patel, announced. "Biometrics are nominal. Heart rate is 72 beats per minute. Respiration is steady. He's calmer than I am." Colonel Rostova stood behind us, a silent, imposing statue. She held a radio handset, her link to the outside world, to the men with guns who surrounded this facility. Her presence was a constant reminder of the stakes. This wasn't just a scientific experiment. It was a matter of national security. A military operation. Mr. Sterling, the Darpa spook, stood in the corner, away from the consoles, his arms crossed. He just watched. His silence was more unnerving than any order Rostova could have given. Alistair took a deep breath, his manic energy focusing into a sharp point. "All right, people, let's make the magic happen. Initiate the pre-sequence charge. On my mark." The low hum in the room deepened in pitch, rising to a gut-rumbling thrum. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration started in the floor, working its way up through the soles of my shoes. On the monitors, I could see the power draw, spiking. The lights in the control room dimmed for a fraction of a second as the grid compensated. In the chamber, the air around Corporal Evans began to shimmer, just slightly, like heat haze on a long highway. "Containment field is live," Patel reported. "Energy levels are climbing." "Steady as she goes," Alistair whispered, his eyes glued to a screen showing a complex, three-dimensional model of the energy field. "Hold it at 90% of peak resonance." That's when I saw it. It was nothing. A tiny flicker on a secondary diagnostic screen, one that monitored the harmonic resonance of the chamber itself. A single data point, a frequency reading that was off by 0.001%. A statistical ghost. A meaningless anomaly. "Alistair," I said, my voice quiet. "Check subharmonic 7. I'm seeing a resonance flutter." Alistair glanced at the screen, his brow furrowing for a nanosecond before smoothing out again. "It's noise, Aris. Feedback from the capacitor banks. It's within acceptable parameters. Well within." "It wasn't there in the simulations," I pressed. "Maybe we should run another diagnostic." Rostova's head turned slightly. I could feel her gaze on the back of my neck. Alistair sighed, a sound of paternalistic exasperation. "Aris, my friend, We can run diagnostics for the next 10 years and always find another decimal point to worry about. The theory is sound, the hardware is sound, the man is ready. It's time to fly. He looked at me, and his eyes were burning with such conviction, such absolute certainty. He believed. In that moment, his faith was stronger than my doubt. I second-guessed myself. It was probably just noise, a new facility, new wiring. There were a million rational explanations. I gave a slow, reluctant nod. Parameters are acceptable, I said, formalizing my assent for the record. The knot of guilt in my stomach tightened. I had a job to do, and I had just failed. I had let his enthusiasm override my caution. A small smile played on Alistair's lips. He turned back to the main console. Thank you, Aris. Final sequence initiated. Full power. Target is the destination platform. On my mark. 3, 2, 1. Mark. He pressed a large red button on the console. The world on the other side of the glass dissolved into light. The moment Alistair's finger depressed that button, the universe held its breath. The low thrumming that had vibrated through our bones for the last 20 minutes instantly ceased, replaced by a silence so profound, so absolute, that it was a physical force. My ears popped. For a single terrifying second, nothing happened. The data streams on the monitors froze. The shimmering air in the chamber vanished. Corporal Evans just stood on the origin platform, a statue in a white void. A part of my brain, the part that had been screaming about the subharmonic flutter, screamed in relief. A misfire, a dud, a failure, but a safe one. Then, it happened. It wasn't an explosion of light and sound like in the movies. It was an implosion of reality. The air around Corporal Evans did not shimmer. It folded. It was a visual impossibility, as if someone had grabbed a piece of the three-dimensional world and crumpled it like paper, a non-Euclidean wrinkle in space. There was a sound, but it wasn't a sound that traveled through the air. It was a sound that happened directly inside my skull. A sharp, high-pitched crack, like a pane of glass breaking, but a pane of glass a mile wide. It was over in less time than it takes to blink. The space where Corporal Evans had been standing was now empty. The origin platform was bare. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stared at the spot, my mind refusing to process the vacant space. He was just gone. Vitals? Rostova's voice was sharp, cutting through the stunned silence in the control room. Lost them, Patel stammered, his fingers flying across his keyboard. The moment of transit, all biometric signals, they just stopped. 0 reading across the board. It's like he ceased to exist. Alistair was leaning forward, his face inches from the glass, a look of pure, ecstatic awe on his face. Of course they stopped, he breathed. He wasn't there. He was nowhere. He was a stream of pure information, a wave of probability. He was beautiful. Where is he, Alistair? I asked, my voice a dry croak. My eyes darted to the destination platform 10 feet away. It was as empty as the first one. A cold dread, colder than any I had ever known, began to seep into my veins. What if the math was wrong? What if we hadn't just moved him? What if we had just deleted him? A human being, a life, a soul, erased from existence by a line of code. Rostova must have felt it too. She keyed her handset. Security team on standby. Medical team to the chamber entrance. Now. But Alistair was laughing, a quiet, breathless laugh of triumph. Patience, my friends. The reconstitution matrix needs time to buffer the data. The quantum wave has to collapse back into a coherent state. Look. Just look. He pointed a trembling finger at the destination platform. At first, there was nothing. Then, I saw it. A single mote of light, like a speck of dust caught in a sunbeam, hovered in the air a few feet above the platform's surface. Then another appeared, and another. Within seconds, there were thousands of them, a swirling, shimmering cloud of golden light, like fireflies in a jar. The cloud began to coalesce, to contract, drawing in on itself. It slowly took on a shape, a vague, man-like silhouette of pure, shimmering energy. It was one of the most beautiful and terrifying things I have ever seen. We were watching a man be born out of light and information, the form solidified, the light dimming, resolving itself into matter. First, the boots appeared, planted firmly on the platform, then the legs, the torso, the arms, the head, and then, as if a switch had been flipped, the light was gone, and Corporal David Evans was standing on the destination platform, perfectly whole. He blinked once, twice, as if waking from a long dream. He looked down at his hands, turning them over, flexing his fingers. He patted his chest, his legs. He was solid. He was real. "We did it," Alistair whispered, slumping back in his chair as if the strings holding him up had been cut. "Oh my God, Aris. We did it." The control room erupted. Technicians were cheering, clapping each other on the back. Patel was letting out a long, shaky breath of relief. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. We had broken a fundamental law of nature and gotten away with it. I felt the tension drain out of me, replaced by a wave of giddy relief. We had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had yielded. Rostova was already on the comms to Evans. "Corporal, can you hear me? Report your status." Her voice was all business, but I could hear the undertone of profound relief. Evans looked up towards our window. "Loud and clear, Colonel," he said, his voice crackling slightly over the intercom. I'm fine." What was that? It felt strange. For a second I felt cold and big. "Big?" Rostova asked. "Describe what you mean by big." "Like I was everywhere at once," Evans said, a note of confusion in his voice. "Like I was the whole room. Then, a snap, and I was here. I feel fine now. A little dizzy, maybe. A slight tingle in my teeth." "That is the residual field effect, Corporal," Alistair cut in, his voice booming with confidence. "Completely normal. A side effect of the energetic transmission. You did magnificently." We spent the next hour running diagnostics. Evans was a model soldier, patiently following every instruction as we had him walk, run in place, perform a series of simple physical and cognitive tests. Everything was perfect. His biometrics were back to their baseline. His reflexes were sharp. His memory was intact. He was, by every metric we had, completely unharmed. The test was a 100%, unqualified, monumental success. Rostova gave the order to power down the Nomad array. The deep hum of the capacitors slowly spun down, replaced by the normal ambient hum of the facility's life support. The test was over. A security detail escorted Corporal Evans to the medical bay for a more thorough examination and debriefing. Alistair, Rostova, and I were left in the control room, the monitors now displaying mundane standby screens. Rostova actually smiled. It was a small, thin thing, but it was a smile. "Congratulations, doctors. You have delivered. The Pentagon will be pleased." She turned and left, presumably to write the report that would change the face of modern warfare. Alistair was staring at the empty chamber, a look of beatific wonder on his face. "Do you realize what this means, Aris? This isn't just a military application. This is everything. Space travel, medicine. We can be anywhere. We can do anything. We are no longer bound by the tyranny of distance." He was right. We stood on the threshold of a new age. We had given humanity the stars. As I watched him, I saw that little flicker on the diagnostic screen again in my mind's eye. The 0.001% anomaly. The ghost in the machine. It seemed so foolish now, so overly cautious. We had succeeded. The proof was walking and talking down the hall in the medical bay. I pushed the thought away, basking in the warm glow of our victory. That was my second mistake, and it was the one that would damn us all. The post-test debriefing was held in Medical Bay 3, a room that smelled of antiseptic and sterilized steel. It was a place for objective measurement, for cold, hard data. We were supposed to be confirming our success, dotting the I's and crossing the T's on a report that would make us legends. Instead, it was where our new world began to unravel. Corporal Evans sat on the edge of an examination table, stripped to the waist, while a medic checked his reflexes with a small rubber hammer. He looked fine, healthy. If you didn't look too closely, I was looking closely. I was looking for the ghost. There was something in his eyes, a stillness, a vacancy. The clear, bright spark of curiosity he'd had before the test was muted, dulled, as if he were looking at the world through a pane of thick, invisible glass. "Everything looks textbook, Colonel," the medic reported, shining a penlight into Evans's pupils. "Pupils are equal, round, and reactive to light. Motor functions are perfect. He's a little dehydrated, but that's to be expected." Alistair was pacing the room like an expectant father, unable to contain his energy. Of course he's fine. He's better than fine. He's the first man in history to travel as pure information and be reassembled without a single byte of data loss. "Corporal, tell them. How do you feel?" Evans turned his head slowly, the movement lacking its previous crispness. He looked at Alistair, but it felt like he was looking through him. "I feel quiet," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "The tingling in my teeth is gone, but there's a hum, a low one, inside my head." I stepped forward. "A hum? Like a sound?" "No, sir," Evans replied, his gaze shifting to me. It was an unnerving look, like being watched by a camera. Not a sound. A feeling. A vibration. Like an engine that's still running, even though the car is turned off. A cold tendril of unease snaked its way down my spine. An engine that's still running. That was a disturbingly accurate description of the resonance flutter I had seen on the diagnostic screen. The one Alistair had dismissed as noise. "The Nomad array is completely powered down, Corporal," Alistair said, a hint of annoyance in his voice. "The field has collapsed. It's a phantom sensation. Psychosomatic. Your brain is just processing the unprecedented experience it just went through." Rostova, ever the pragmatist, stepped in. "Dr. Finch is right. It's likely a form of neural echo. It will fade." "Corporal, I want to talk about the moment of transit. You said you felt big. Elaborate on that." Evans was silent for a long moment. His gaze drifted to the far wall of the medical bay, but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at something far, far away. "It's hard to explain, ma'am," he said, his voice a low monotone. "There was no me. The feeling of having a body, of being here. It was gone. I wasn't just in the chamber. I was the chamber. I was the walls. The air. I could feel the control room. I could feel you. All of you. Not like seeing or hearing. Like knowing. I was spread out. Thin. Like a drop of ink in a gallon of water." His words hung in the sterile air of the room. The medic stopped what he was doing. Alistair's confident smile faltered. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't in the simulations. In our models, the subject's consciousness was supposed to be held in a state of quantum suspension, effectively off during the transit. He wasn't supposed to be aware. He certainly wasn't supposed to be sentient and spread across the entire apparatus. "That's impossible," Alistair stammered, running a hand through his already messy hair. The consciousness matrix. It should have been isolated. The data stream must have been broader than we calculated, I said, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying slowness. The resonance flutter. It wasn't noise. It was a harmonic coupling. The system didn't just transmit his body. It transmitted his consciousness and smeared it across the local environment. Rostova's face was a mask of cold fury. She turned to Alistair. You told me the subject would be unaware. You told me this was a physical transport system, not a psychic one. It is! It was a momentary, unexpected side effect! Alistair insisted, his voice rising in panic. He's back now! He's whole! The system worked! Did it? I asked quietly. I looked at Evans. He was still staring at the wall, a slight, almost imperceptible tremor running through his body. His hands, resting on his knees, were clenched into tight fists. He was fighting something. The medic, trying to break the tension, moved to put a blood pressure cuff on Evans's arm. Okay, Corporal, let's just get your pressure one more time. As the medic reached for him, Evans flinched. Not a big movement, just a sharp, involuntary jerk away from the touch. And then he did something that stopped every heart in the room. He took a step. It wasn't a normal step. It wasn't a conscious decision to move from one place to another. His right foot lifted, swung forward, and planted itself on the floor with a soft thud. It was a mechanical, automatic motion, like a toy soldier that had been wound up and released. He was now standing on the floor next to the examination table. He looked down at his own foot as if he had never seen it before. Corporal? Rostova's voice was like ice. What was that? I don't know, ma'am, Evans said, his voice laced with the first hint of genuine fear. I didn't mean to do that. It just happened. He tried to shift his weight to step back onto the table, but he couldn't. Instead, his left foot lifted, swung forward in the same mechanical arc, and planted itself in front of his right. He had taken another step forward. He was now facing the steel instrument cart that stood between him and the wall. Stop, Alistair commanded, his voice trembling. Corporal Evans, stop moving. I'm trying, sir, Evans said, and I could hear the sheer, desperate panic in his voice now. He was straining, his muscles bunched and taut. His face was pale, and a sheen of sweat had broken out on his forehead. I can't stop. And then his right foot moved again. Another perfect, measured, unstoppable step forward. He was a marionette whose strings were being pulled by an invisible hand. The direction of the pull was constant. Forward, straight forward. The direction he had been facing when the hum, the engine, had started inside his head. The central artifact of our experiment wasn't a tape or a logbook. It was a living man. And the horrifying revelation wasn't something we discovered in a file. It was something we were watching unfold, one inexorable step at a time. The machine was off. The test was over. But the process had never stopped. The instrument cart stood directly in Corporal Evans's path. It was a heavy, stainless steel thing, laden with trays of medical tools, monitors, and coiled cables. It weighed at least 150 pounds. It was a solid, immovable fact in the middle of the room. Any normal person would have stopped, would have walked around it. But Evans was no longer a normal person. His left foot came forward in that same smooth, relentless rhythm. It made contact with the bottom shelf of the cart. There was a dull, metallic clang. For a split second, I prayed that this would be it. The irresistible force meeting the immovable object. The spell would be broken. He would stumble, fall, and wake up from this nightmare. The cart shuddered. Its wheels screeched against the polished linoleum floor. Evans did not stumble. He did not slow down. His leg pushed forward with a steady, unnatural pressure, and the heavy cart began to slide across the room. He was like a slow-motion battering ram, a human bulldozer. "My God," the medic whispered, backing away until his shoulders hit the wall. "What is he?" Alistair was frantic, his scientific mind trying to grapple with the impossibility he was witnessing. "It's a quantum compulsion, a feedback loop." The reconstitution matrix must have imprinted a kinetic vector on his baseline state. He's trapped in the last command he was given: move from origin to destination. Move forward. "Speak English, Alistair," Rostova barked, her hand already reaching for the panic button on the wall. "What is happening to my soldier?" "The forward button is stuck on, Eva," Alistair screamed, his composure completely shattered. "We didn't just teleport him, we turned him into a perpetual motion machine." Evans's right foot came forward. "Push." The cart scraped another foot across the floor. His left foot came forward. Push. Another foot. He wasn't walking anymore. He was a force of nature, a geological event happening in slow motion. His face was a mask of terror and confusion. He wasn't controlling this. He was a passenger in his own body. He was the ghost in his own machine. "Evans!" I shouted, my voice raw. "Can you turn? Can you change direction?" He grunted with effort, his neck muscles cording. He tried to turn his head, to shift his shoulders. But his body remained locked on its forward trajectory, like a train on an invisible track. "No, sir," he gasped out. It won't listen. I'm just going straight." The cart hit the wall with a loud, hollow boom. It was a dead end. He was trapped. This had to be the end of it. Evans's left foot came forward, planting itself firmly on the floor. His right leg began to rise, to move forward into the space now occupied by the steel cart and the concrete wall behind it. This was the moment of truth. His knee made contact with the flat side of the cart. I braced myself for the sound of shattering bone, for his scream of pain. But there was no sound. There was no impact. His leg just kept going. It didn't push the cart. It didn't break. It passed through it. The fabric of his fatigue pants, the skin of his leg, his flesh and bone, all of it became semi-transparent, shimmering with a faint, staticky light, like a bad television signal. It slid through the solid steel of the cart as if it were smoke. The medic choked back a sob. Rostova took an involuntary step back, her face ashen. Alistair stared, his mouth hanging open, his eyes wide with a horror that went beyond science. A horror that was primal, elemental. I felt the world tilt on its axis. The laws of physics, the solid, dependable rules that had governed my entire life, were not just being broken. They were being mocked. They were being shown to be nothing more than a polite suggestion, a guideline that we had foolishly mistaken for a commandment. Evans's leg emerged from the other side of the cart, whole and solid again. He completed the step, his foot landing silently on the floor just inches from the wall. Now his entire body was pressing against the cart, and his form began to flicker and phase, his solid torso dissolving into a translucent, ghostly image that superimposed itself over the steel and the instruments. He was walking through it, not around it, not over it, through. "He's not solid," I breathed, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. We didn't just break his connection to a single location. We broke his interaction with matter itself. He's become a probability wave, a quantum ghost. His left foot lifted, preparing for the next step. The step that would take him into the wall. The solid, 6-inch thick reinforced concrete wall of the medical bay. "Do something!" Rostova screamed at Alistair. "Turn it off!" "I can't!" Alistair shrieked, tearing at his hair. "The machine is off! This isn't the machine! This is him! This is what he is now! We didn't invent a teleporter! We invented a new state of matter, and we trapped a man inside it!" Evans's forward foot, now completely phased, passed through the last few inches of the cart. It was now inside the concrete of the wall, solid matter passing through solid matter, with no more resistance than a man walking through a morning fog. He didn't seem to notice. He couldn't stop. He was trapped on a journey that had only one direction, straight ahead. And straight ahead was the wall. Then the earth. Then what? My mind reeled with the implications. He was a phantom, forever propelled forward on a line that had been drawn by a single catastrophic button press. The steady, rhythmic sound of his footsteps, which had once been a comforting sign of his health, now became the most terrifying sound in the world. It was the sound of a clock ticking, a clock that could never be stopped, and it was ticking its way right through the foundations of our reality. The moment before Corporal Evans's body made full contact with the wall was a tableau of frozen horror. Every person in that room was paralyzed, trapped in a state of disbelief so profound, it felt like time itself had slowed to a crawl. The medic was pressed flat against the far wall, his knuckles white where he gripped a stainless steel handrail. His eyes screwed shut as if not seeing it would make it not real. Rostova had her sidearm drawn, the black metal of the pistol looking like a child's toy against the sheer, physics-defying insanity of the situation. Who was she going to shoot? The wall? The ghost walking through it? Alistair was on his knees, his face buried in his hands, rocking back and forth and muttering a frantic, incoherent litany of equations and apologies. And I just stood there, watching, feeling like a scientist observing the birth of a new, terrible star, powerless to do anything but document its awful light. Evans's forward momentum did not cease. His head, his shoulders, his entire torso followed his leg. As his body met the cold, painted surface of the concrete wall, it didn't collide. It submerged. His form dissolved into that same shimmering, translucent state, a human-shaped mirage of static and faint light. For a heart-stopping second, he was half in the room, half in the wall, a living, breathing paradox. I could see the faint outline of the rebar and electrical conduits inside the concrete, superimposed over his chest and face. His expression was one of quiet, dawning horror. He was aware. He could feel this happening. He was a conscious mind trapped inside a body that no longer obeyed the fundamental agreements of existence. It doesn't hurt. His voice crackled over the room's intercom system, a disembodied, ghostly whisper. It doesn't feel like anything at all. It's just cold, so cold. And then he was gone. He slid the rest of the way into the wall and vanished from our sight completely. The room was silent except for the sound of Alistair's ragged sobbing. For a moment, we all just stared at the blank, solid wall where a man had just been. It was pristine, unmarked, as if he had never existed. "Containment breach!" Rostova's voice, honed by years of training, cut through the shock. She was already on her radio. "All teams, I have a containment breach. Subject is mobile and intangible. Seal the sector. I repeat, seal Sector Gamma. No one in, no one out." A young security guard, no older than Evans, burst into the room, his rifle at the ready. "Colonel, what's the situation? Where's the subject?" Before Rostova could answer, the guard let out a choked cry of alarm and stumbled backward. He was staring at the wall directly behind him. Corporal Evans was emerging from it. He slid out of the solid concrete into the corridor outside the medical bay, as smoothly and as silently as he had entered the other side. He was whole again, solid, taking another one of his relentless, measured steps down the pristine white hallway. The guard, acting on pure reflex, pure training, raised his rifle. "Freeze! On the ground! Now!" Evans couldn't respond. He just kept walking. The guard, his face a mask of panicked confusion, reached out to grab his shoulder to physically stop him. It was a catastrophic mistake. The guard's hand, his arm up to the elbow, passed directly through Evans's back as if he were made of smoke. The guard screamed, a high, thin sound of pure animal terror, and snatched his arm back, staring at his own hand as if it had been burned, as if it had touched something profane, something that should not be. He looked at his hand, then at the impossible walking man, and then he fainted, collapsing to the linoleum floor in a heap. Evans did not notice. He couldn't. He just kept walking. Step, step, step. Down the long, sterile corridor, alarms began to blare throughout the facility, a wailing synthetic cry of chaos. Red lights flashed, painting the white walls in strobing splashes of blood. I ran out of the medical bay, followed by Rostova. Alistair remained on the floor, a broken man. We could see Evans about 50 feet ahead of us, moving at a steady, unhurried pace. A pace you could easily outrun, but could never, ever stop. "We have to get ahead of him," Rostova yelled over the alarms. "Warn the central control room. He's heading right for the primary reactor." We ran, our footsteps echoing frantically in the corridor, a stark contrast to his calm, rhythmic pace. We rounded a corner and saw 2 more guards ahead trying to block the hallway. They had a heavy supply crate overturned, a makeshift barricade. It was pointless. Evans walked right up to it, his body phasing through the wood and metal, and continued on his way without breaking stride. He was a concept now, not a man. The concept of forward. He passed through a sealed blast door that should have been able to withstand a small nuclear detonation. He walked through a server room, his intangible form passing harmlessly through racks of humming, vital computer systems. We followed, helpless, watching on security monitors as he passed from sector to sector. He was a ghost, haunting his own tomb. His path was a perfectly straight line, plotted on the facility map. A line that started on the destination platform in the test chamber, and now extended out, aimed at the heart of the base, and beyond that, at the vast, empty expanse of the Nevada desert. We were watching a man begin a journey to nowhere, a journey that would never, could never end. The horror of it was not in its violence, but in its cold, indifferent, unstoppable logic. We had wound him up, and now he would walk forever. I felt a profound, soul-crushing guilt. This was our creation. This was the immortality that Alistair had promised. A silent, lonely, eternal walk through a world he could no longer touch. A world that could no longer touch him back. He was the loneliest man in the history of the universe, and we had made him. The facility was in chaos. The wail of the alarms was a constant, nerve-shredding scream. The flashing red emergency lights made every shadow dance and turned the familiar, sterile corridors into a vision of hell. Rostova was a whirlwind of controlled fury, her voice a sharp, commanding bark on the radio, ordering lockdowns, rerouting security teams, trying to apply the rigid logic of military procedure to a problem that defied all logic. It was like trying to build a dam to stop a fog. I ran alongside her, my mind racing, desperately trying to find a solution, a variable we had missed, some way to reverse the process. But every theory, every equation, led to the same terrifying conclusion. The effect was self-sustaining. It wasn't powered by our machine anymore. It was powered by him. His own atomic structure had been fundamentally and irrevocably altered. He was the engine now. We reached the main operations center, a large, circular room with a holographic map of the facility shimmering in its center. A dozen technicians were at their stations, their faces pale in the glow of their monitors. A red dot, labeled Subject Nomad, was blinking on the holographic map. It was moving in a perfectly straight line. "Status!" Rostova commanded as we entered. A senior technician, a man named Garvey, swiveled in his chair. "He's just passed through the west wall of the cryo lab, Colonel. His trajectory is taking him directly through sub-level 3's primary generator conduit. My blood ran cold. The main power conduit? If he phases through that, the energy discharge could be catastrophic. It could trip the entire grid. Can we shut it down? Rostova asked. Not without blacking out the entire facility, Colonel, Garvey replied, sweat beading on his forehead. Including containment for other projects. We can't do it. We were trapped. We couldn't stop him. We couldn't shut down the things in his path without destroying the facility ourselves. We could only watch. On the main view screen, a security camera feed showed the generator conduit. It was a massive, heavily shielded tunnel, thick with cables the size of a man's arm, all pulsing with a visible aura of electromagnetic energy. The air in the tunnel crackled, and then he appeared. Corporal Evans slid out of the solid concrete wall on the left side of the screen, taking his steady, rhythmic steps. He didn't seem to notice the lethal energies crackling around him. He was just walking. As his body entered the densest part of the energy field, the camera feed erupted in a shower of static. His form, already translucent, became a chaotic storm of light and shadow. The air around him ionized, flashing with brilliant blue and white sparks. The lights in the operations center flickered violently. The alarms sputtered and died for a second, then shrieked back to life at a higher, more frantic pitch. Then, as he passed through the center of the conduit and began to emerge on the other side, the energy storm subsided. He solidified, stepping out of the conduit and into the far wall, continuing his journey, completely unharmed. The power grid had held, but barely. Garvey let out a long, shaky breath. I don't believe it. He passed through trillions of watts of raw power and it didn't even singe him. He's not just intangible. He's inert. He doesn't interact with anything. Matter, energy. It all just passes right through him. Rostova stared at the screen, her military mind finally grasping the full, terrifying scope of the situation. This wasn't a rogue asset to be captured. This wasn't a problem to be solved. This was a new law of nature. He's a walking state secret, she said, her voice barely a whisper. A secret that is about to walk right out of this facility. Her face hardened, a new cold resolve settling in. The phase of trying to save Evans was over. The phase of containing the knowledge of his existence had begun. Get me a direct line to the Pentagon, she said to her aide. Authorization code Sierra November Tango. I'm declaring a broken arrow scenario. No, worse. A empty quiver. This facility is now under permanent lockdown. Nothing gets out. No one gets out. She turned to me, her eyes like chips of ice. Dr. Thorne, you and Dr. Finch created this thing. You will stay here. You will analyze the data. You will find a way to replicate it, and you will find a way to undo it. You will not leave this facility until you do. That is an order. I just stared at her, stunned. A permanent lockdown. A prisoner in our own tomb. But before I could protest, Garvey cried out again. Colonel, look! He pointed at the holographic map. The red dot representing Evans had reached the outer perimeter of the underground facility. It was now heading upwards, towards the surface, towards the desert, towards the world. He's leaving the bunker, I said, a strange sense of finality washing over me. There's nothing left to stop him. Rostova just watched the red dot ascend. Her expression was unreadable. She had failed. Her mission to control the asset was a complete disaster. But in that moment, I realized something. In her mind, the mission had just changed. The asset was no longer Corporal Evans. The asset was the phenomenon itself, and his escape was not a failure. It was the beginning of a new, much larger experiment. A field test. We were no longer his captors. We were his first observers, watching our creation take its first steps out into the world. The alarms were still screaming, but in the operations center, a new, terrible silence had fallen. It was the silence of acceptance. The silence of utter, absolute horror. The breach was complete. The ghost was out of the machine. The transition from the frantic, claustrophobic chaos of the bunker to the vast, silent indifference of the desert night was jarring. We watched it happen on the main view screen. The feed switched to an exterior camera mounted on a perimeter tower. The image was grainy, washed out by the powerful infrared floodlights, but the scene was starkly clear. The ground, a flat, sterile patch of packed sand and gravel inside the perimeter fence, began to ripple. It was a subtle distortion at first, like heat haze. Then the ground bulged upwards, and Corporal Evans's head and shoulders rose out of the solid earth, as if he were surfacing from a deep pool of water. He was covered in dust and dirt, but it fell away from him as he fully emerged, leaving his fatigues pristine, untouched. He stood for a fraction of a second, a solid man in the middle of an empty desert, bathed in the harsh, artificial light. Then his legs began to move. Step, step, step. The journey continued. He walked directly towards the inner perimeter fence, a 12-foot-high chain-link barrier topped with coils of gleaming razor wire. It was a fence designed to stop a truck. To Evans, it was an inconvenience of less substance than a shadow. He didn't climb it. He didn't break it. He walked through it. His body shimmered into its ghostly, translucent state, passing through the interlocking steel diamonds and the sharp barbs of the wire without a single snag, without a single sound. He reformed on the other side and continued walking across the 50-foot-wide no man's land toward the final outer fence. Rostova stood beside me, her arms crossed, watching the screen with a chillingly detached focus. She was no longer a panicked commander trying to contain a disaster. She was a scientist observing a data point. "Activate the scimitar system," she ordered into her radio, her voice flat. "What's scimitar?" I asked. "A non-lethal perimeter defense," she replied without looking at me. "High-intensity microwave emitters, designed to incapacitate intruders by boiling the water in their skin from 200 yards away. It's persuasive." I felt sick. "You're going to cook him?" "I am going to test his interactive properties with directed energy," she corrected me, her voice cold. "We need to know what, if anything, can affect him." On the screen, Evans reached the outer fence. Just as he began to phase through it, the scimitar system activated. There was no visible beam, but the air around him suddenly warped and shimmered violently. The sand at his feet hissed and turned to glass from the intense heat. Any normal human would have been flash-cooked, their flesh turning to charred jerky in a fraction of a second. Evans's form flickered, the static of his intangible state growing more intense, more chaotic, as if he were a television picture struggling to hold together in a storm. But he did not slow. He did not burn. He did not scream. He passed through the fence and the lethal curtain of microwaves and emerged on the other side, into the true desert, beyond the lights of our facility. He was unharmed. "Incredible," Rostova breathed, "completely inert. Note the time and the energy readings, Garvey. The experiment is proceeding." The experiment. That's what this was to her now. A field test. Corporal Evans, a man she had a duty of care to protect, was now just a mobile anomaly to be studied from a distance. Mr. Sterling, the Darpa spook, stepped out of the shadows. He had been silent through the entire ordeal, a gray phantom at the edge of the chaos. He now held a satellite phone to his ear. "The package is in the open," he said into the phone, his voice a calm, clipped monotone. "Repeat, the package is in the open. Trajectory is stable. Initiate Nomad. Tracking protocols. Full satellite and drone surveillance. I want to know every time this thing blinks." He hung up and looked at Rostova. "The asset is now a global concern, Colonel. Your authority on this matter is rescinded. From this moment on, this facility and everyone in it belongs to me." Rostova's jaw tightened, but she did not protest. She knew a superior power when she saw one. The chain of command had just been rewritten. We were no longer a military research facility. We were a monitoring station for a ghost. For the next several hours, we did nothing but watch. We watched a single blinking red dot on a global map. The dot that was Corporal David Evans. He walked out of the harsh glare of the facility's lights and into the deep, profound darkness of the Nevada night. He walked over rocks and through sagebrush. He walked up the side of a steep, rocky mesa, his path never deviating, his pace never changing. He passed through a herd of sleeping desert bighorn sheep, their solid, living bodies as permeable to him as the air. He was a silent, unstoppable specter on a journey to nowhere, leaving no footprints, casting no shadow. He was heading northwest, a straight line, a line that, if extended, would eventually take him across the Sierra Nevada mountains, across the Central Valley of California, and out into the vast, blue emptiness of the Pacific Ocean. I went to find Alistair. He was in his office, sitting in the dark, staring at a blank computer screen. The frantic, energetic visionary was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell of a man. "We have to do something," I said, my voice sounding weak in the silence of his room. "We can't just let him walk to his death." Alistair didn't turn. He just laughed, a dry, broken sound. "His death? Aris, my friend, don't you understand? He can't die. That's the horror of it. We killed him the moment we pressed that button. What's walking out there now is just the echo, the momentum. We didn't just break his connection to one place. We broke his connection to everything. To life, to death, to rest." He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes were voids. "There is no off switch, Aris. We can't save him. We can't stop him. All we can do is watch. All we can do is bear witness to the sin we have committed." I left him there in the darkness. I went back to the operations center and stared at the map. The red dot blinked, steady and relentless, a heartbeat for a man who was no longer truly alive. The sun began to rise, painting the desert in shades of orange and pink. Out there, somewhere, a man who couldn't stop walking was greeting the dawn. A dawn he could see and feel, but could no longer be a part of. His journey had just begun, and we, his creators, his jailers, were condemned to watch every single, solitary step. The days that followed blurred into a monotonous, soul-crushing routine of pure observation. Sight Chimera transformed under Sterling's silent command. It was no longer a place of frantic discovery, but a tomb of quiet, obsessive vigilance. We became monks in a high-tech monastery, our prayers replaced by data streams, our deity a single blinking red dot on a screen. The official narrative, disseminated by Sterling's people, was that the experiment had failed in a catastrophic but contained manner. The project was terminated. The records were sealed, classified at a level so high that most of the Pentagon would never even know it existed. We, the survivors, myself, Rostova, the handful of technicians, and the broken shell of Alistair Finch, were now part of the containment. We were living ghosts, haunting the facility, our lives dedicated to tracking the real ghost we had unleashed upon the world. The operations center was our world. The massive screen at the front of the room, once a display for facility schematics, now showed a live satellite feed. It was a God's eye view, a cold, detached perspective of Corporal Evans's endless journey. We watched him walk. That's all we did. For 24 hours a day, in rotating shifts, we watched him. We watched him traverse the brutal, jagged peaks of the Sierra Nevada. He did not follow trails or seek mountain passes. He walked in a straight line. He walked through granite cliffs, his form dissolving into a faint shimmer as he passed through 100 feet of solid rock and reforming on the other side. He walked through ancient sequoia trees, their massive living trunks offering no more resistance than the air. We watched him cross the fertile farmlands of California's Central Valley. He walked through barns, through farmhouses where families were eating dinner, utterly unaware that a quantum anomaly, a ghost of a man, was passing silently through their lives. He walked through irrigation canals, his body passing through the water without creating a single ripple. Nothing touched him. Nothing stopped him. His pace never varied. It was a steady 3 miles per hour, 72 miles per day. Every day. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He didn't rest. He just was, a constant of forward motion. We tracked his biometrics through a faint residual quantum signature he emitted, a faint echo of the data we'd once read from the sensors on his skin. His vitals were flatlined. No heartbeat, no respiration, no brain activity. By every medical definition, Corporal David Evans was dead, but he was still walking. Rostova adapted to our new reality with a chilling professionalism. She became the warden of our prison, organizing the shifts, managing the data logs, enforcing Sterling's draconian security protocols. She never spoke of Evans as a man anymore. He was the asset, the anomaly, the target. It was her way of coping, of compartmentalizing the horror. She was a soldier, and this was her new, indefinite posting. I spent my time analyzing the data from the experiment, going over every microsecond of the transit, every fluctuation in the energy field. I was looking for the flaw, the key, the one thing we could change to reverse the effect. But the math was a closed loop, a perfect, elegant, horrifying trap. The equation showed that his state was now fundamentally stable. He wasn't a man experiencing an ongoing effect. The effect was him. To cure him would be to erase him from existence entirely. Alistair was the one who truly understood. He rarely came to the operations center anymore. I found him one night in the now decommissioned test chamber standing on the Origin platform, the place where it had all started. The room was dark, powered down, but the air still felt heavy with the memory of what had happened there. "I see it now," he said to the darkness, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "I see it so clearly." "See what, Alistair?" I asked gently. "The flaw in the model. My arrogance? I treated reality as a static, programmable state, a computer code to be rewritten. But it's not. It's a consensus, an agreement. Every particle agrees to behave in a certain way, to respect certain boundaries, to stay in one place. It's a fragile gentleman's agreement that holds the universe together." He turned to me, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "We didn't just teach Corporal Evans's atoms a new trick, Aris. We taught them to stop listening to the consensus. We told them they didn't have to agree with the wall, or the mountain, or the floor. We made him a conscientious objector in the war of existence. He picked up a small, forgotten wrench from a tool cart. This wrench, it's solid because every atom in it agrees to be solid. It rests in my hand because every atom in it agrees with gravity. It is anchored to reality." He paused, looking at his own hand. "We didn't invent a teleporter, Aris. We just found the button that severs the anchor. We unmoored him, and now he's adrift on an ocean of possibilities, with his last known trajectory as his only rudder." He spent the next few days in a feverish state, writing. He filled notebooks with frantic equations, philosophical treatises, and desperate warnings. He was trying to document his sin, to leave a message in a bottle for whoever might be foolish enough to follow in our footsteps. On the 9th day of the long walk, we watched on the satellite feed as Corporal Evans reached the California coast, just north of San Francisco. It was a beautiful sunny day. The waves of the Pacific crashed against a rocky shore. Tourists were taking pictures. He walked down the cliffside, his form phasing through the rock and onto the wet sand of the beach. He didn't pause. He didn't look at the ocean. He just kept walking. He walked into the surf. The cold, powerful waves of the Pacific Ocean washed over him, around him, through him. His body didn't even create a splash. He walked down the sloping sand of the seabed, getting deeper and deeper, until the shimmering, sunlit surface of the water was high above him, and then he was gone from the view of the coastal cameras. But we could still see him. A faint, ghostly image on the thermal satellite feed. A man-shaped patch of absolute cold, walking along the bottom of the ocean, moving steadily out into the abyssal plain. Later that day, I found Alistair's final note. He had left it on my console in the operations center. It was a single page torn from his notebook, with his last terrible revelation scrawled in a shaky hand. It wasn't an equation, it was an epitaph. It read, "We saw the universe as a locked door. We thought we were building a key, but we didn't. We just broke the hinges. We didn't open the door for him to step through. We just detached him from the house. He's not in a new room. He's not even in the yard. He's just falling. And the direction of his fall is forward." That night, Alistair Finch hanged himself in the test chamber. He used a power cable, standing on the destination platform, the place where his greatest triumph had become his ultimate damnation. The journey to nowhere was not his to take, but the guilt was a burden he could no longer carry. We were two creators. Now, I was the only one left to bear witness. The satellite signal held for another 76 hours. We watched a cold, man-shaped specter walk across the seabed, descending deeper and deeper into the crushing blackness of the Pacific Trench. He walked through undersea volcanic vents that would have melted a submarine, their superheated water passing through him without effect. He walked through chasms of eternal darkness, past creatures of light and horror that had never seen the sun. He just kept walking. Northwest. Then, at 0300 hours on the 12th day of his journey, approximately 400 miles off the coast of Oregon, the signal vanished. It wasn't a gradual fading. It was a sudden, abrupt cessation. One moment, the faint quantum echo of his existence was there. The next, it was gone. Just static. Sterling and his team spent weeks trying to reacquire the signal, tasking every available satellite, every naval asset, every deep-sea drone. They found nothing. It was as if he had finally walked off the edge of the map into a place where our physics, our ability to observe, simply ceased to apply. Had he walked into the Earth's molten core? Had his quantum state finally decohered into nothingness after being stretched too far? Or had he simply walked into another dimension, a place where the rules were different? We will never know. His journey ended in a question mark. With the asset gone, Site Chimera was decommissioned for good. A team of men in sterile white suits, men who didn't have faces, only designations, arrived. They methodically wiped every server, shredded every document, and dismantled every piece of equipment. They were erasing our sin from history. Then came the debriefing. It wasn't a debriefing. It was an indoctrination. I was taken to a room, a perfect gray cube with no windows and one door. It was probably deep underground at some other, even more secret facility. Sterling sat across a simple steel table from me. Colonel Rostova was there too, standing by the door. Her face was a blank slate. She had made her choice. She had become part of the machine. "Dr. Aris Thorne," Sterling began, his voice as flat and empty as the room. "According to the official record, you were part of a Darpa project to develop advanced battery technology. The project was unsuccessful and has been terminated. You will receive a generous pension for your service. You will be given a new identity, a new home, a new life. You will never contact any of your former colleagues. You will never speak of Site Chimera, Protocol Nomad, or Corporal David Evans again. You will not write it down. You will not whisper it in your sleep. You will forget." He leaned forward, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes. Not anger, not malice, just a profound, chilling certainty. Because if you do remember, if we have even the slightest suspicion that you have remembered, we will not come for you in the night. We will not threaten you. We will simply edit the record. Your new name will disappear from the system. Your bank accounts will cease to exist. Your driver's license will be invalid. The deed to your house will be blank. The memories of you in the minds of your neighbors will fade. You, Dr. Thorne, will become a rounding error. You will cease to have ever been. Do you understand? I understood. I understood the nature of true power. It wasn't the power to kill a man. It was the power to erase the fact that he had ever lived. And so, I became a ghost of a different kind. I took the new name. I took the new life. I lived in quiet, paranoid silence for 15 years. I became a high school physics teacher in a sleepy town in Ohio, trying to teach Newton's simple, reliable laws to kids who were more interested in their phones. I never married. I never made close friends. How could I? How could I connect with a world that I knew was built on such a fragile, breakable foundation? How could I look at a solid wall without thinking of the man who walked right through it? But the past is never truly gone. It just waits. And now, I'm an old man, sitting in a dark room, talking to a tape recorder. Because the whispers have started again. The geological surveys, the anomalous energy readings, the reports that disappear. They think he's gone. They think the experiment is over. But Alistair was right. We didn't just unmoor him from our reality. We unmoored him from our time. What if his journey wasn't a straight line? What if his journey was a loop? What if, after all these years, he is finally walking his way back? I don't know. I can't know. All I have is this story, this warning, a confession from a man who helped break the world and was condemned to live in the pieces. They told me to forget, but I can't, because sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the world is asleep, I can still feel that hum, that low, steady vibration from a machine that was turned off long ago, and I know he's still walking. So, that's the story of Protocol Nomad. A story about how the ambition to conquer distance resulted in a man becoming eternally lost in it. Officially, the project was a failure, a footnote in a redacted budget report buried in a Pentagon sub-basement. But you and I both know the truth now. They didn't fail to build a teleporter. They succeeded in breaking a man's connection to the world, and in doing so, created the loneliest ghost in human history. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story made you think, or look over your shoulder at a solid wall just a little differently, support the channel with a like and subscribe, and be sure to share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, walk carefully. And remember that the shortest distance between 2 points isn't always a straight line. Sometimes, it's a fall that never ends.